Welcome to episode 27 of the Empowering Ability Podcast.
Welcome to the Empowering Ability Podcast, where we get you and your loved ones impacted by disability the information needed to live a full and meaningful life. Now here's your host, Eric Gall.
Hey folks, welcome back to the podcast. Thanks for joining again today, or if you're new to the podcast, thanks for listening. So today we have Jeff Dobbin, who is the Executive Director of Partners for Planning out of Toronto, Ontario. And Partners for Planning is an affiliate of Plan BC. And I've been also fortunate enough to be a guest blogger on Plan BC's blog. So big thank you and shout out to Plan BC for that opportunity. And excited to have Jeff on the podcast. If you've listened to the introduction episode of the Empowering Ability Podcast, where I tell a little bit about my story and bring on my sister, who has a developmental disability, and my mom, I mentioned Partners for Planning as an excellent resource for families and supporters to learn about person-centered planning and to get really resources that will benefit you on your journey of planning and creating a full life for an individual, and so they can also contribute in society. So excited to bring Jeff onto the podcast to share more about that resource. Also to really talk about why planning, why think about designing your life instead of just letting it happen by default, and why that's so important. I also give my perspective on that. And then Jeff shares some of the how. So how to start planning, and gives us three really key building blocks to start from or to continue to build upon. So excited to share this chat with Jeff with you, and here's Jeff. Hey Jeff, welcome to the Empowering Ability Podcast. Thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Eric. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, awesome. So I've been following Partners for Planning for a little while, and I've tuned into many of your webinars. So for those folks out there that are listening to the podcast that haven't heard of Partners for Planning, can you just give us a little bit about Partners for Planning?
Sure. We're a relatively new organization. We started in 2009, and we're an organization that's a nonprofit. We're family-formed and family-driven. So half of our board members are parents with a child with an intellectual disability. As well, the majority of our staff are also family members. So when we formed the organization, we did so with the realization that many families are concerned about the future for their sons and daughters with a disability. And it really doesn't matter the nature of the disability at all, whether it could be a mental health challenge, intellectual disability, autism, physical disability. Parents and families are concerned for the future, and specifically what will happen when they can no longer care for their sons and daughters. So we created the organization to provide resources to families. We started off providing workshops. We are an affiliate of the Plan Institute in BC, and with them we published a book, Safe and Secure. We have a technical background within the organization, and so we've created a number of different digital resources for families over the years. And one that we developed a few years ago is the P4P Planning Network, and it's an online resource designed specifically to help families plan for the future. And so that's been very well received. We received funding through the Ministry of Community and Social Services to develop that resource. And it's available across the province of Ontario, although we do have people from around the world tuning into different webcasts and accessing the resources on the planning network.
Awesome. Yeah, and as I mentioned earlier, it's a fantastic resource, so I recommend that families and supporters and anybody around that's interested in disability check that out. So Jeff, why is proactive planning and supporting families with planning such a priority for Partners for Planning?
Well, Eric, there really are a number of reasons why we encourage families to think about the future and to start thinking about a plan. What many families will tell us is that, very little happens for their children with disabilities unless they're sort of intentionally involved in directing things. So, I know I have 3 kids and, they don't have disabilities and they pretty much figured out their lives. They finished school, they found their job, they moved out of the house, they have their own financial resources. And, I'm just well aware that that's not always the case for children living with disabilities. It often does require intention on the part of parents to make those things happen. So the sooner families can start thinking about that, the better. Also, with all the wait lists that individuals with disabilities are experiencing in Ontario, you just never know when services and supports may or may not be available. So, you can't really sit back and count on the government to step up and provide all of the supports you may need. And I think the last reason why we really encourage families to be proactive has to do with individualized funding and that move towards more individualized community-based approaches. Families now have an opportunity to create some really incredible things and opportunities for their kids around work and community involvement and new relationships. And so, again, the sooner you could start that process, the better. So it's our hope that we can provide those tools and strategies and resources that will empower families to take action.
Yeah, I think those are such important points, Jeff, and you make me think of my own family and me and my sister, right? So I made the decision to go to university and to leave the house at 18, like many kids do that might not be impacted by a disability. Whereas my sister stayed at home, and after she stayed in high school until she was 21, and then more or less she was at home and ended up a lot of the time in my parents' basement. So it gets exactly the point that you're making in terms of if there's not intentionality in planning for a son or a daughter that has a disability to think about what's next and what do they want to do in their life and what are those goals, what does that vision look like? Just so important. I mean, just rings so true with my family.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and I think it is. There are changes that are in place that are really exciting. We're seeing people with disabilities now starting businesses and working in companies and, just being involved in so many different things that you never would have anticipated if your focus was purely on congregated programs and services.
Right, exactly. And to your other point around funding, so there's funding like, for example, passport dollars and hopefully more individualized funding that will be available in the future for individuals to be able to live into those visions, right? And to have that greater community involvement and out in the community developing relationships. So I agree that planning is super important and to think about it as early as possible. And one of the things that I noticed, Jeff, is just this idea of creating a culture of possibility and that being something that P4P promotes. Can you just speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if people, especially people who haven't had a lot of opportunities to be involved in their communities, maybe they've attended segregated schools or have been part of congregated programs and services. The whole idea of participating fully as a citizen and contributing to your community is an extreme idea for many people if they haven't had that opportunity. And one of the things that we try to do with the Planning Network is to profile, stories of hope and possibility, and to help people realize that, individuals with disabilities can contribute, can do really creative things, can have a great life, and can direct their own lives in really unique ways.
Mm-hmm. So that I love the getting those stories out so people can see that there's other decisions or other choices or other ways that you can live your life, and thinking about living your life by design. So and thinking about creating that vision for the future and not just living by default, right? And just not living the status quo or what you see maybe just kind of everybody else doing. So I love that, the culture of possibility.
Yeah, stories inspire. And, one of the webcasts that we produced was called Thinking Outside of the Disability Box. and profiled a young man in Peterborough and his mother, who again just have been so creative in the ways that they've helped construct his life, and he's just doing incredible things. So stories like this are definitely motivating.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you've touched a little bit on the resources that you offer. Would you be able to kind of give us a bit of a breakdown on those resources and maybe even where listeners can go access them?
Sure, absolutely. So the URL for the Planning Network is simply planningnetwork.ca. All of the content fits into really the model that was developed by Plan in BC. And I had mentioned the book before, Safe and Secure. So Safe and Secure is a book that Al Edmansky wrote. And I really like the way that they have categorized their resources within that book. So we sort of mirrored that. So the Planning Network organizes the content into 6 different categories. So one is just the whole idea around planning and what's involved in planning and creating a vision for the future. Another looks at relationships and community. We certainly believe that relationships are a foundation to anyone wanting to create a good life. We look at work and contribution. So people working in regular community businesses and or volunteering in unique places. We look at legal and financial planning. There's certainly a lot of things that families can do to impact their financial sustainability. Something just as simple as accessing the RDSP can change so many opportunities. We look at home and what's involved in creating a home of your own. And then lastly, we think it's important that people do qualify for all of the supports that they're eligible for. So we have a section on provincial and federal supports that people can access. Yeah, and then the Planning Network, we offer a number of different types of resources. I think you had mentioned the webcasts. We offer about 40 webcasts a year. And they're quite dynamic webcasts. We have a small studio here in Leslieville, and we're able to produce some fairly high quality productions. They would fit into all of those 6 categories. We have some other resources like a professional services directory, so families can find lawyers and accountants and financial advisors who have an understanding of the challenges that families caring for someone with a disability must face. We have a family networks page where organizations that offer family networks can list contact information on that page, and families can find other families to connect with. And then we have a doc zone, which contains quite a few short documentaries, as we discussed, look at possibility and hope.
Awesome. So there's some great resources there for families and supporters. In terms of consuming that content, Jeff, I'm assuming that you can just go in there and click on, for example, if you want to learn about family or relationships and community, you just go into that section and you can kind of read through the material. Maybe you could just talk a bit to that and how to access the content. And also in terms of the webcasts, how can somebody access those webcasts?
Sure. So everything's available on the one page, so planningnetwork.ca. And a lot of the produced resources are in the Learning Center. One thing that we're really excited about is the whole idea of using mixed media and digital media in really creative ways. So a lot of the resources we've created are articles with embedded videos, and it's a very visual resource. With respect to the webcasts, right on the home page, there's a listing of upcoming webcasts, and people can register right there. So it's all quite simple to access.
Okay, perfect. So in the show notes of the podcast, I'll make sure to list the URL for the website and also for signing up for the webcast. So folks can just do that with one click.
Excellent.
So I guess, Jeff, who do you see using the Planning Network? Like who's the audience that you find coming on, and how are they using it?
Yeah, it's interesting. We launched it a little over 3 years ago, and we've had about 50,000 people access it so far. And while we designed it specifically for families, we're finding that it's getting broad use. In distributing the planning network, we've partnered with a number of organizations across the province. So we have over 100 organizational partners, and we support them in sharing the resource with their families and stakeholders. And so we found that a lot of these organizations will use a planning network for their own staff, and if they have a webcast on a particular topic, it's quite common actually that we'll have other professionals tuning in to watch webcasts. So while it was designed for families, we're getting many people tuning in to watch the webcasts. One thing we didn't anticipate is we're finding groups of people coming together to watch webcasts. We keep the webcasts relatively short, less than 45 minutes, and then we have a live Q&A with every webcast. And so we're finding, groups of people, family networks coming together and watching the webcast, and then having a conversation with a local context on whatever the particular topic is of that webcast. And that's, certainly something we didn't anticipate.
That's really neat. And there's listeners of the podcast that are outside of Ontario. So across Canada, growing listeners in the US, Australia, and other places in the world. So are the webcasts and the content applicable to an audience outside of Ontario, Canada?
Sure. I would think that 60 to 70% of the content does apply outside of Ontario. There are some specific resources around financial planning and some particular supports that are particular to Ontario that may not apply as much, but certainly there's lots there for anyone regardless of where they are.
Okay, fantastic. That's great to know for our listeners that are outside of Ontario. So just kind of thinking this through in my own experience with my family and other families. Families are kind of at different stages in terms of planning. So some might be at the start, some have done a few things, somewhere in the middle, some might have a quite detailed plan and vision created. So maybe for those families that are looking to start a plan, what are some of the first things you would recommend that they think about?
Right, that's a great question. I think probably the first thing that I would recommend is, just taking some time to really think about what type of life you'd like to help your son and daughter create. Take some time to really think about what is important and what is possible, and don't be afraid to dream.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, perfect. That vision is so important. And I think their comment that I made earlier, or we were talking about the culture of possibility, right? So having that mindset when creating that vision is super important to really design that individual, but also the family's life moving forward. Is there maybe one or two other important things that families should consider when starting to think about the future and creating that plan?
Sure. As I mentioned, we're an affiliate of the Plan Institute in BC, and Plan has been helping families for over 25 years think about the future. And when they came together around the question of what will happen to their sons and daughters when they could no longer care for them. But they quickly realized that perhaps a more critical question was who would be there for their sons and daughters when they could no longer care for them. So the whole idea of inviting other people into your life and I guess being of the mindset that you don't have to do it alone, that having others involved and supporting your plan and helping you create a plan and a vision is really important and certainly can help secure the future. So I think that would be the second key thing is don't be afraid to invite others into your life and into your son or daughter's life.
Mm-hmm. And that can be such a challenge, right? And it takes some courage and vulnerability to allow other people in. But in my personal experience with my own family, and again with other families, it just opens up the door for possibility and opportunity, especially for that individual with disabilities. And it's interesting, Jeff, like when I think about my family, it's inviting other people in and fostering relationships has had a big difference on my sister's life, who has a developmental disability, but it's also had a massive impact on everybody's life in my family, especially my mom, which, I wasn't really expecting. So it's just cool to see how inviting other people in really does have such a huge impact on everybody's life in the family.
Absolutely. And, I think some people anyways, are really hesitant to want to reach out and invite others in. And so there are some types of supports that families can get that can help not only with that, but with the whole idea of creating a plan. So in Ontario, there is a movement towards independent facilitation. So facilitators can work with an individual and family and can really help facilitate that process of creating a plan and creating a life where there's opportunities to build relationships.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And I've been involved with facilitation for a while, and we have a facilitator for my family, and it's been a great help. Her name's Joanna Good, and we did a podcast together. So if listeners are interested in learning more about independent facilitation, I recommend that you check out that podcast. And I'm sure, Jeff, is there any resources that you have on independent facilitation at P4P?
Yes, we do have some videos that speak to what independent facilitation is all about. But what I would recommend is that people visit the Ontario Independent Facilitation Network website. So that's oifn.ca. And there's great resources on independent facilitation there.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so we talked about creating a vision, building relationships, bringing people into your lives. Is there anything on kind of the resources or support side of things that you would recommend that families strongly consider?
Well, I think I would strongly recommend that everyone open an RDSP if they're eligible. So an RDSP, for those who are unfamiliar, is the Registered Disability Savings Plan, and it's a program that was created by the federal government and really does provide some generous grants and bonds to individuals with disabilities. And if someone was to open an RDSP, say at age 5, and they happen to qualify fully for the grants and bonds, at age 35, they would have an asset that would be worth about $350,000. That would continue to grow, and so the lifelong benefits of an RDSP. Like this would be, close to $1 million. So it really is a game changer when you think about wanting to plan for the future and purchase other supports and looking at housing options and having resources like this that are completely flexible is a game changer for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree on the RDSP and that's a great example that you provide, Jeff, on the power of the RDSP and the impact that it can make on somebody's life financially. And for your investment in the RDSP, you're getting up to a 300% return on any money that you put into it. And for some folks, you don't even have to invest money into that RDSP to qualify for that bond portion of the plan. So I recommend that families check that out. Is there, again, there's information on P4P on the P4P website on the RDSP, Jeff?
Yeah. In the Learning Center, there are a number of different resources, but we also offer webcasts usually once a month on the RDSP, an introduction to the RDSP. And we're producing one now that looks at the issues people need to be aware of once they've opened an RDSP. So there are definitely considerations, that people need to take into account once it is open. The beauty of an RDSP too is that it's one of the few financial resources that people can access that doesn't interfere with any other government supports. So it really, it has no impact on any of the other provincial supports that are available. So it has that added advantage as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's perfect. Okay. So there's some awesome resources for you guys to check out, you listeners to check out. And Jeff, I'd love just to talk a little bit about the art of belonging. So I was fortunate enough to attend the event in person. I believe it was in March of this year. Could you speak to just a little bit about that event and kind of how it came to be and what it was all about?
Sure. Yeah, we were really excited to have an opportunity to host the Art of Belonging, which was a TED Talk inspired event. We weren't permitted to use the TED Talk branding because we're an organization and we had a theme, but the Art of Belonging brought together 6 people with really diverse backgrounds to provide unique perspectives on sort of the principles and strength of community. So it wasn't all disability focused. It was looking at sort of the bigger issue. And so we held it in a theater in Toronto, but we also webcast it around the world. So it was exciting. We had people in Australia tuning in to watch it, certainly across Canada and across the States. And it was a great evening.
Very cool. And is there a recording or a video available that folks can go tune into that and watch those talks?
Yeah, absolutely. On the Planning Network, everything is right there. So there is an Art of Belonging tab, and you can listen to each of the individual presentations. Okay,
fantastic. So I'm going to link directly to that in the notes of the podcast, so people can easily access that as well. Yeah. So
just interject. Just one thought that I had around that. You talked about the just the power of thinking in a positive way and thinking about possibility and hope. And with the Art of Belonging, it was certainly our intention to help promote again those values and principles of inclusion and community and socially valued roles that we believe everyone can play in their community. And so it was just so great to have that opportunity to reinforce those deeper principles around community.
I love that. And I definitely share those values. The podcast shares those values as well. And it's awesome that, there's folks like Partners for Planning out there really promoting and educating people on those values and the power of them. I think that's super important to help the social change that's occurring for people with disabilities.
Excellent.
Great, Jeff. Well, I'm super appreciative of you coming on the podcast today and sharing about the Planning Network, the resources that are available, and how families can start to think about putting together a plan. So thanks so much, and I look forward to staying connected.
Well, thank you, Eric. And I'll just say that if people do visit the Planning Network, there is an opportunity to join our mail list. And as we develop new resources, we'll let you know what we have coming. So again, all of the resources on the Planning Network are free. And I appreciate the opportunity to come on your podcast and speak about the Planning Network.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on, Jeff. Really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, Eric.
A big thank you goes out to Jeff Dobbin for joining me on the podcast this week. And I love this idea and concept of creating a culture of possibility. And I hope this podcast and hearing Jeff speak about that and, the idea of planning and creating your vision for the future and working towards that. I hope this starts to spur an idea or some thoughts around creating a culture of possibility for a loved one in your life that might have a disability, or someone in your family, or someone that you support. And I hope this podcast gives you some ideas on how to start to create the vision for those different possibilities that might exist. And P4B definitely has some great resources that you can go and access to start to plan that vision and implement it. So I highly also recommend their webinars, and I've linked to their content, their webinars, their newsletter in the show notes of the podcast and also on the blog. So go ahead and check that out. And if housing is something that you're working on, feel free to go to the website and get the free download on creating your home. So there's this great workbook that's going to help guide you through creating your vision and starting to implement your vision for what your home looks like. So go on over to the website. It's empoweringability.org. And I think you'll get a lot of value out of that. I'd like to thank all of our listeners that have left us a review on iTunes. Your reviews help me understand what I'm doing well, what I can improve on the podcast, what you want to hear. So it's great feedback that you're providing, so please continue to do so. Also, by leaving a 5-star review, it helps other people find the podcast. So thanks so much for those reviews and keep them coming. Next week on the podcast, we have another exciting guest coming on, and it is Ann Douglas. And Ann is a well-known author focusing on the topic of parenting. And Ann and I talk about her recent book titled Parenting Through the Storm, How to Handle the Highs, the Lows, and Everything in Between. And on the podcast, Ann shares how she has personally handled some of those highs, lows, and everything in between in the podcast in her own life and in parenting her 4 children who have all experienced some sort of mental health challenges in their lives and who are now grown and thriving out in the world. So it's a fun podcast. Ann and I also talk a lot about self-care and how we need to take care of ourselves. So in order to be able to be a good parent and to serve others. So join us next week for the podcast with Ann Douglas. And again, thanks so much for listening today, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks for listening to today's podcast. Visit us at empoweringability.org for more podcasts and resources to help you and your loved ones impacted by disability build a full and meaningful life.